guys, welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine, the podcast where we talk about complicated things and improve over time, just like wine does. Our guest this week is Kanita, and I'm really excited about this episode because she has a lot to share, and I think it's going to be really interesting for everybody if you've dealt with generational trauma, breaking patterns, and especially for us adults that are children of emotionally unavailable parents and all that. I think this is going to be a really interesting, insightful episode. But Kanita, you shared with me that your background's in social work, and so I'm kind of curious just to learn more about how you got into that, and then the specific things that you're really focusing on now, how you got into that as well.
Okay. I always love when people ask me that question because I probably should come up with an elevator pitch answer of how I got into social work. But the truth is, literally, I fell into social work or social work fell into me. So I'm originally from New York City, Queens, born and raised, which is exciting. Growing up in New York, I spent a lot of time taking public transportation. And when you take public transportation in New York City, you see a lot of what we're now calling unhoused individuals, which at the time were homeless people. So I would, beg my parents for money. I would try to take my socks off and give socks to homeless people on the street. And I never understood why in one part of the city you have individuals that have so much. And then, not even 12 steps away sometimes, there are people who have absolutely nothing and are living in the train. So that kind of got me interested in helping people. My mom is a nurse. My dad, retired dental technician, and they were really big in the church. So they did community service. So like I have a helping spirit. That's how I was raised. The challenges when I went to college, I actually wanted to study journalism, but my parents are very strict is the word that I'm going to use. And they're like, nope, you're going to this particular college. It was a Christian college. I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. This Seventh-day Adventist college, that's it, that's all. And they had literally nothing that I was interested in studying. So I studied psychology. I'm like, I like to talk. Let's see what let's see what happens there. So that kind of evolved into, I did psychology and I did social work. And it's like, okay, well, after school, like, what do? You get your master's and then you go into social work. And what I thought social work was taking kids out of homes that were not good for them. So I did child protective services for a while. And then, that kind of evolved into doing some, I think maybe for 4 or 5 years, I did intensive work in sexual abuse. So in doing all of these different things, I did work in mental health, serious mental illness. In doing all of this work, what kept coming up to me was like, where did this come from for these people? Right? Like when I met with kids who were being sexually abused, 9 times out of 10, their mothers were sexually abused as well. And I'm like, let's cut that out, like cut it out from the root so that people don't have to continue to suffer. So that's where my real interest in breaking generational patterns and curses came in. And then, also the fact that I'm Black, right? And being Black in America also comes with a lot of generational patterns that were passed down because we had to survive to get through this country. And one day I was just like, I'm tired of surviving. Like, where's the point where we thrive? Right. And in order to thrive, you have to heal. So that's kind of the pattern or the process of how I got into social work, how I got into being truly interested in breaking generational patterns and curses. And I say curses because that's what the Bible calls it. And, the Bible was kind of beaten to me. So those are things that kind of stick out into my head. So that was kind of my trajectory to get where I am right now.
Oh, okay. Where I know you kind of mentioned that you first thought social work was kind of more like DPSS type stuff. Was there anything kind of going into psychology or even now into your career that you did not expect would be involved or part of it?
I think I didn't expect most of it, if I'm 100% honest, because I wanted to be a journalist. So I wasn't thinking about any of this stuff, right? In high school, I took a Erickson class and we talked about hierarchy of needs. as well. So that stuff was interesting. But in terms of really breaking down and understanding people at the core, understanding families and systems at the core, when I started, that was never something that made sense to me, right? DPSS or Child Protective Services was really just this one particular family is beating this one particular kid, and you have to remove them, and that's it, that's all. But even starting that, it's so much became illuminated, right? Because why are you quote unquote beating your kid or spanking your kid? There's so much more that goes into that. So that all of that was a surprise for me, really thinking about just the people's thought process and why is this okay? Why does this make sense? And really unpacking all of that.
I'm curious because you were saying like 9 out of 10 that if a child is sexually abused, that their mother was also sexually abused. And I know because I've taken some psychology classes, and some of the books I read, they talk about that if a parent suffered some type of trauma, it's most likely their child will end up experiencing the same type of trauma or something along the lines. Why do you think that is? Like, have you seen any like commonalities of why these children are more susceptible to this kind of abuse?
Well, because we learn what we're taught, right? And most of the time, people who have experienced abuse, they walk through this world, sadly, as victims, right? And people who are perpetrators can easily spot a victim, right? And I use the word victim very lightly because I don't like to call people victims, but for all intents and purposes, that's it. There is a victim mentality. So if you've been a victim of some sort of sexual abuse, sometimes if you're not healing, if you're not doing the work, you are training your child to have victim like behavior as well, right? Like if you can think of it as if you've ever met a child who has a sibling with special needs, right? Let's say autism, and and the child who's autistic is stemming. The child, their sibling who does not have a special need, who does not have autism, you'll sometimes see that they have a similar behavior because they kind of mirror their siblings' behavior. So it's really similar with parents who've been sexually abused, right? Your child is mirroring your behavior. They're mirroring your fears, and if you haven't dealt with it, they tend to start being the person who's kind of looking over their shoulder and afraid of their own shadow. And again, like I said, perpetrators pick those people out very easily, and that's how the cycle kind of continues.
Have you, so with your career, have you been able to do coaching on, and how does that look? So if there's a parent that's been abused, have you done coaching that helps them prepare their child for changing the narrative of like the quote unquote victim mentality, or have you done coaching for children that seeing the victim mentality? Again, I don't want to make it sound like negative, but just for all intensive purposes, where they see that as the example of living. Have you done coaching on for them to switch the narrative as well?
Yes, and so for the parent, a lot of times it really is digging deep and healing, which is, I find that to be the most difficult because in order to heal, you have to actually unpack what happened to you. And it's been my experience that a lot of, I have a friend who calls these individuals super adults. A lot of super adults don't want to unpack their trauma. It's like, it happened. It's a part of my story. We're not going to cry over spilled milk, whatever, leave it alone. Um, so sometimes I would love to coach them. I would love to help them unpack their trauma, but they're like, listen, I'm 45, I'm 62, whatever happened, leave me alone. With the kids or the younger people, it really is helping them understand which part of the way you move through the world is you, and which part of the way you move through the world is how you were indoctrinated to move through the world, right? um and that's really challenging Because if you look in the mirror and you're like, okay, this is who I am. This is Kanita. I'm 25 years old. I've been this, happy, bubbly person. I've been this, whatever it is for 25 years. And then you come to a therapist or a coach, and the coach is like, okay, well, are you really actually a happy, bubbly person? Or have you curated this persona because of what your parent told you had to be? And that's a shock when you have to really sit down and say, you know what, I don't like pretending to be this happily bubbly person, or I've been moving through this world as introverted, as quiet, as whatever. And I actually am the opposite of that. So I've been living in my parents' fear or my parents' indoctrination, or whatever it is. So yeah, absolutely, I've coached people through that, and it's an arduous process,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better word, because it's difficult. It's difficult when somebody tries to tell you that you need to pick yourself apart, right?
Yeah, I can imagine, especially for older adults, that they have gone, 40, 50 years of not even kind of opening that closet or that drawer in their minds, and then having to be told by a therapist or a coach saying, like, well, we need to break down, we can need to go through everything, go through all the dirty laundry to really nitpick and see what is the root cause. I'm sure that's one in itself, like, almost traumatic, because you're having to relive all these memories. Are there ways where people going through coaching like that can, like, approach it more like an easier approach or a little bit more gentle? Are there, like, different types of ways that coaching can go?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I like to integrate healing practices into therapy and coaching as well. So I'm really big into somaticism. So anything that'll involve the body. So meditation, yoga, so relaxation techniques. I'm really big on that, because once you do heavy work, like, you need to figure out how you're going to bring yourself down, right? And again, just a gentle conversation and giving people permission. I'm really big on giving people permission. Like we were talking about earlier, I'm currently working on a coaching program, a coaching group for individuals who are healing from what we call the mother wound. So I'm actually with my mom right now. We don't live in the same state. We live, on different coasts. And I was talking to my mom yesterday about the coaching program. I'm like, okay, well, is there anything that you think I'm missing? And she immediately was like, well, I don't know. I didn't have an absent mother. And I chuckled because I'm first generation American. My mom came to this country when she was 16 years old, and her mother stayed in Jamaica, her country of origin. I was like, well, mom, you know, your mother was not intentionally unavailable, but she was unavailable because of geography, right? Like, that's just a fact. You came here as a 16-year-old, you didn't have a parent, you weren't a full adult. This was 70s. So it's not 2023 where you could pick up a phone and FaceTime your mom if you wanted and really be connected with her. If you wanted to talk to her, you had to write a letter and wait for her to respond. Um, so there had to be times when you came to this new country, you needed a mom and you didn't have that. Like, how did that affect you? When I tell you, my mom was like just adamant of, nope, that's not me. That's not my story. My mom was available. I mean, I left her alone because also she's my mom. She's not my client and she's not paying me. And, she might still beat me. But that I had to laugh at that. Like, she did not give herself permission to even acknowledge that, in the realm of mothering, there was something that she's missing, and not missing because her mom was a bad mother, really missing because her mom did a good thing for her, which is send her to a different country to try to have a better life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So especially in situations like this, like it's really a delicate situation to help people understand the duality of mothering, of parenting. Like you can have a parent that did their absolute best, and that same parent could have left a hole and a void. Um, but helping individuals understand the duality of that is, it's big,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of massaging.
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up with a very unavailable emotionally unavailable mother, and so I didn't realize until really realize until starting therapy during the pandemic of how there was still a lot of that I needed to process.
Mm-hmm.
Question I have is between like is have you noticed with clients or people in general, if does it matter if it's either the father or the mother, whichever one's more unavailable, that's impacted the child more?
I think it in my experience, let me say, not even think, in my experience, if the mother is unavailable, it impacts the child's more. And this is because of the patriarchy. This is
Mm-hmm.
because of societal expectations, right? We expect that mothers are certain things. Mothers are nurturers, right? Mothers are fierce protectors of their youth. Mothers are providers. Like all of these things are what mothers, quote unquote, are. And when you have expectations, you are guaranteed to be disappointed.
Right.
Yeah, but society tells us that we don't need to have any expectations of dads, right? Like dads typically are just one thing. They give the money and they give the money.
Right.
When you get a dad that does more than just give money, it's a parade, it's a party. Oh my goodness, you're such an amazing dad. You're so wonderful. Because there's literally no other expectation than you're a financial provider. But with a mother, you have all of these expectations. So you have all of these other ways to be disappointed. So yeah, that impacts people more. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because growing up, if obviously I don't expect anybody to understand the dynamics I had with my mom, but it ever came up, the always question is like, oh, how about your parents? And I would just mention like, oh, it's only my dad, mom's not in the picture. And there's the expectation of they don't get why. And then I get the reaction of their expectations of, how do I say it? Like if it's basically I realized pretty young that okay, if I had mentioned that my dad wasn't around, no one would question it. No one would say anything. They would just leave the topic. But the fact that I said my mother was no longer around, that's when everyone they can't fathom. And I think for me that was always the hardest part growing up. And even now as an adult, I still have a hard time sometimes. Not that I feel like I need to explain to people, but especially when they keep questioning just because they're curious, having to tell them like, yeah, no, I don't get it either, I don't know why, but it is what it is. And yeah, I was just curious because for me that's always been, I've noticed more, it's been more difficult for me compared to friends that don't have their dads because no one really like nitpicks on the question.
Expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so layered too, because that means so much for the child who's experiencing it, and that also means a lot for the mother who's dealing with it, right? Because as a child, if every time somebody asks, it's, oh, my mom's not in the picture. Wait, what? Where's your mom? What's going on? Was she sick? And then they'll go, I guarantee you, and you haven't told me this, but I'm sure they go down a litany of, was she sick? Did she die? Like all of these things. And it's like, no, she's, just not here. Right? Like it is what it is. She elected to do something else. But for for young people who have not yet gone to therapy, yet have done the work, when they hear people surprised in that way, there has to be a thought that comes into your head. Well, if this is not typical that moms do this, and my mom did this, maybe there's something wrong with me, right? Like guarantee you that's what youth have to think, right? And you're shaking your head. So
No,
yeah.
there was stuff, especially when I was a teenager, because some context, like she was physically around until I was 19, but mentally, emotionally, and logistically, she wasn't. She's kind of just there. And so it's was very difficult when, if friends happen to come over, but they don't understand the dynamics, and I see how their moms are with them. I definitely had internalized that something was wrong with me, because one, that was the narrative I was being fed. And then two, with the expectation of, okay, like my mother's supposed to be the number one, right, from birth, scan on scan, just like that instant connection. But then to realize that there was never the connection to begin with, I speaking for myself, I definitely internalized that narrative to the core of, like, I was the problem, or like there was something wrong with me. So yeah, it's interesting how it can kind of metastasize into different ways of thinking.
And then, I mean, and how can you not, right? How can you not internalize that when people are constantly beating you in the head with this narrative? But then for the mom as well, and again, I don't know your mom, but I would anticipate that it's also extremely difficult for her because again, she was supposed to be this person that had this deep bond and deep connection with this perfect little human. And, for whatever reason, she didn't. So I'm sure from her end also she got questions of, wait, you have kids or you're not doing this or you're here but you're not really here. Like you as a human person, if you hear that also constantly, there's got to be something wrong with me. No other mom does this. Moms are inherently connected to their kids, so I have to be a huge problem if I'm not, right? And not saying that she might not have things that she needs to work through, but again, these are not narratives that are said to dads, right? Like dads who don't connect with their kids. It's just, oh, okay, well, that sucks. and then it's a move on, right? So how do women, how do people, how do mothers, daughters, I guess sons too, because that's a narrative that could be given to sons. But how do you now heal and start being the full version of who you are if you're constantly being fed the narrative that something is wrong with you because you didn't do what someone thought you should do, right? And it's my belief that everybody should not have kids. But if you are a woman and you say, well, I don't have kids, something's wrong with you,
Right.
right? Hands down, something's wrong with you. And thank God the world is changing. So I think it's a little now easier for women to say, I don't want kids. But back in the day, no, you had to have kids. So you have kids. You didn't want them. And again, just talking in general, but now you're not connected to them. So now there's something wrong with you. What? I said I didn't want these people in the first place, right? Like this was not something that, like, I knew myself well enough to know that this wasn't where my trajectory should go. But if I didn't have this, then I was less of a woman. But now I'm even more less of a woman because I'm not connected. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I can't even imagine having to go through that. And I'm glad you brought up the narrative that, like, my mom or other moms could be facing too, because I'll be honest, I've never thought from her perspective. So I'm glad that you brought it up, because it is a very valid point, and it's interesting to kind of see that and realize, like, oh, okay, she was probably being fed things as well that might have made the situation worse between her and her children and all that. So it's a really interesting point. Um, what are ways do you think, like, as a society, we can stop setting expectations on others in that way?
Well, one is smash the patriarchy. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, right? But I think the answer. So one thing I tell my clients is because people say should almost every other word. I think most of the time. For me, should is an absolute curse word. Should does not exist. There is no should in this life. And I think once we start removing the should from our vocabulary, excuse me, um, we start we start removing the expectations. We start again smashing the patriarchy because we have to realize that humans are humans, no matter what their gender. Humans are humans. So if a human tells you, I don't want to be a parent, let them not be a parent, regardless of if they're a male human or a female human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do we hold individuals that appear to be female at a much higher standard than we do individuals who appear to be males, right? Once we start truly seeing people as just people, as just human beings with a whole range of emotions, a whole range of feelings, then we'll see that those expectations break down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's the question of how you do it. Like, honestly, it just takes time. It takes what you're doing right now. It takes these conversations. It takes, you know, peeling back the veil, right? Like, and seeing, I don't know if you've ever seen The Wizard of Oz. I freaking love it.
Mm-hmm.
But pulling back the veil and seeing, oh crap, he's not a wizard. He's just a person, right? But we hold people to these supernatural expectations that they cannot live up to. And we will inevitably be disappointed. Let people just be humans and not expect them to be wizards.
Mm-hmm. I kind of want to go more into the coaching program that you're doing. So I'd love to learn more if you can share how you started structuring it and maybe obstacles that you face trying to structure it or accomplishments that you've come across. I'm just really curious to see how your whole process was with structuring this program.
Absolutely. So it was so frustrating to me because I am an individual who loves to boil the ocean, right? Like, I want everyone to get everything from the thing that I'm doing. So again, really just giving myself permission as well that this is a 7/8 week course. And I say 7/8 because I'm still trying to figure that part out. Um, People are not going to get everything they need to heal in that time frame, right? So one, giving myself permission to understand that, and really just sitting down and thinking and asking myself, what are the most important parts, right? So people who need to heal from having emotionally unavailable mothers, because actually I had started with parents and then I narrowed down to mothers. I might do another one for fathers at a later time. But what are the most important things that they need to know? So I kind of broke it down a little bit of like how the conversation we're having, right? Like, one, what is a mother? And really allowing the group to talk about, when you hear that word mother, what do you expect? Right? Like, what does that even mean to you? And then now the question is, what did you need from your mother
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't get? And this one is a very, very loaded one, right? Um, because I found in my work that even mothers who were there and who believed themselves to be available have children who are like, no, my mother was not available. And those, I think, again, are the people who have the hardest time verbalizing that they have a challenge, right? For example, I grew up with both of my parents in the house. My mom was a registered nurse. She worked a lot. She worked nights. She worked weekends sometimes. Um, she was always at work. I know my mom loves me, but I am personally, maybe this is one of the reasons why I'm a mental health professional. I feel everything. I have big emotions, right? Um, so I need someone to understand my big emotions. My mom is a Jamaican woman. She's very, what that means is it's very structured. You wake up in the morning, you make your bed, you clean your room, you eat your breakfast. Like, it's kind of militant. Um, so it took me a very long time to understand that there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with me. The fact that I was not on a militant schedule. That's just not who I am, right? So as much as I had a mom that was present and tried to be available, she was not emotionally available for my specific needs, right? So I now have to be able to articulate that and not take away from all of the other things she gave me as well. So a part of the program is really, again, like I said, giving permission. Let's talk about the things that you did get from your mom and let's celebrate those things, but let's look at the duality as well. Um, and then, and then we move into the forgiveness piece of it, right? Like, let's forgive, let's let it go, because it is my belief in this world that people do the best that they can. I hold on to that belief. I believe positive intent always, because if not, you just walk around here being bitter. So again, it's really helping people really understand what if, or ask the question, what if your mom did the best that she could? And that, again, that'll take a lot to unpack with certain people, because especially if you had a mom that was physically abusive, people can't understand, or I've had clients whose mom, sold them for sex. What do you mean my mom did the best that she could? How dare she? Okay, but let's still talk about that, because what was going on with her that this was her best? So again, really unpacking all that as well, and then kind of ending with also giving the participant permission to be the narrator of their own story, because a lot of times we give other people too much power, no matter who that person is. It could be our mom, it could be our dad, it could be a boyfriend or whatever. We give people the pen to write our story, but no, it's ours. We get to pen it. We get to determine how we're going to move through this world. So, I mean, that's kind of the way the program is structured, like really moving through awareness, acceptance, and healing from having emotionally unavailable mom.
Yeah, I could imagine it's a very, quote unquote, like a rigorous 7 to 8 weeks to have to really peel back all the layers and go through that. As you were talking about, what if your mother did her best? I was even thinking, like, for me, it's like, was she though? But that's part of the thing where you have to just kind of, for a moment at least, just kind of step out of your head a little bit and be like, well, okay, well, let's just entertain the idea and see. And so I'm glad you brought that up too, because there's definitely, even though I think I've done a good job of not moving on, but processing and healing from it, there's still like moments like this, like conversation where deep down the little hurt girl in me is kind of still very resistant. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because those are just really good things for anyone listening, or even myself, just to keep in mind and even maybe consider just for your healing.
Yeah. And a part of the program, I'm glad you talked about your little girl in you as well. A part of the program too is about inner child healing, right? Like, once we identify what your little child didn't have, like, how do we heal that part? How do we give you what you didn't get? How do we give you the power to identify surrogate mothers? How do we give you the opportunity to mother yourself? Right. And it's so hard. Like, I fully understand that it's difficult when we say, people do the best that we can, like, hands down. And I've done it too. This is your best, really? Like, are you sure? Like, it doesn't, I don't know if that's the case, but again, everybody's barometer is different, right? People's barometer is different. Everything is different, right? And just because I've seen you do wonderful things in another way that appear that they have the capacity, we are not in other people's body. So we don't know what people's capacity is. And again, that's really, really difficult to understand. And none of this is linear. None of this is linear. Part of the program too is about grief, because this all of this is really steeped in grief as well, because you have to grieve what you didn't get. And when you look at your friends and how they are with their moms, and you see people having, it's social media makes it worse in my opinion. You see people having spa days with their moms, and on Mother's Day they're doing all these wonderful things, and you're like, well, let me go ahead and drink this wine with my dad. Like,
It's I'm laughing because it's literally how it goes. Like on Mother's Day, I tell my dad, "Hey, Happy Mother's Day," and Mother's Day is sometimes a really hard holiday for me. I've gotten really better about it, and I say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms that I know in my life and congratulate them. This year was the first year that I had someone send me a text message acknowledging that, this day, that Mother's Day could be a really tough day for me. And it was my best friend. And man, I cried when I saw her text because no one has ever acknowledged that. And so I was just chuckling because it's funny because, like, let me just have a glass of wine with my dad. I'm like, that's literally how it goes.
I mean, because what else do you do, right? And again, this whole fear of missing out, because again, the world tells you things should look this way. Mother's Day obviously usually is bigger than Father's Day because mothers do everything. And then here are people who have complicated relationships with their mothers are thinking, do they? Right? They do literally nothing. And here I am seeming like I'm the only person in the world having this experience. And that's actually the reason why I wanted to create this group, because I was finding that I was doing this work individually, and people truly felt and truly believed I am the only person who has a complicated relationship with my mother. And I'm like, girl, no. This is a thing. There's a whole group of people out here that are dealing with the same stuff in different ways, obviously, but dealing with the same stuff. And I mean, and again, the program also, there's a lot to work through, right? Like we're going to write letters. We're going to, let things out. And there's also permission to be angry, right? And I feel like I have to say that because listening to myself talk, I feel like I'm kind of selling strawberries and rainbows. And none of this is strawberries and rainbows. You get to be angry also. You get to be freaking angry that you didn't get this thing that feels like a human right. And that's okay. It's okay if you're angry about that, right? But you don't let the anger, like, let's not let the anger control our lives and keep us stuck. And then more importantly, let's not make the anger and the hurt and the resentment make you an emotionally unavailable mother if you have kids as well.
I am, again, I'm glad you brought that up. For my mom, she definitely carried that cycle pattern into her family that she got from her parents and that her parents got from their parents. So on my mom's side, definitely some deep rooted generational trauma trickled down. And the last time I saw her, I made sure we had a conversation, kind of like, I apologize and I forgive, but this is it. Just trying to break that pattern. And I forgot what point I was gonna get to, but oh yes, I one of my biggest fears as a kid and even going into college was that I was gonna be like my mom.
Mm.
Because I had people tell me like, well, you are your mother's daughter, that gene's in you, like she's a part of you, so you have that capability. And it was always the biggest fear in my life that what if I repeat the cycle and be that way too. And so I'm glad you brought up the whole thing of, breaking the patterns and just trying to find ways that these people can really resolve and think. And like you said, it's okay to be angry because we're human and we experience all the emotions. And I've realized for my personal experience, the times where I've actually just really embraced how I was feeling in the moment and sat with it but not dwelling in it has led me to kind of just get through the hurdle.
Absolutely. I talk to my clients a lot about conveyor belt thinking, right? Like you go to the grocery store, you put your stuff on the conveyor belt and it goes and it gets rung up. Like let your thoughts like move on the conveyor belt. Feel them, feel your feelings, think your thoughts, but to your point, don't dwell in them. Don't turn the conveyor belt off and stare at this thing the whole entire time because you miss out. You can miss out on the beauty of life when you do that. Like let them move past you. Feel them in the moment while they're there, but let them move past you. Don't grab onto the hard feelings and say, I have to have this hard feeling because I want to be angry, right? Or I
Mm-hmm.
want to be sad.
What are some ways for people listening that are dealing with mother wounds, or they know there's generational trauma that's kind of been cycling in their family? What are ways that they could, like maybe even today or sometime this week or in a month, can start implementing practices to start that healing journey for themselves?
Mhm. So my first absolute cliche answer, because I'm a therapist, is call a therapist, seek therapy. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, um, yoga is a big deal. Yoga is a big deal. I don't think people understand how impactful yoga is in moving trauma through our body. There's a book. It's very cerebral, but there's a book that's entitled "The Body Keeps the Score."
I'm actually reading that book right now.
Are you like?
Yes.
Do your eyes start crossing with all of the research?
It's mind-boggling because I again, before you continue, I love that it is cerebral because you're really getting to see what parts of your brain and your body are, how they're being affected by trauma. And so anyway, but yes, I love that book.
So So you understand, the body truly does keep the score of everything. It keeps a score of trauma and yoga, especially hip openers. So even if you can't go to a yoga class, do some hip opener stretches in your home and breathe through it. You will start to feel, right? You'll start to feel, it's kind of trippy, honestly, because sometimes if you do hip openers enough, you'll find yourself start crying and you're like, well, what the heck is going on right now? Right? Like the body is really trying to release all the feelings and trauma that have been stored there. I'm really big on journaling, right? People I often get people say I don't like to write, so journaling is not for me. Journaling is still for you. Do a video journal. Turn on
Mm-hmm.
your camera, talk to the camera, say everything that you want to say to whoever it is that's hurting you, to whatever feeling, like just get it out. Those are those are some really big things. I'm looking at the pillows behind you. I started as a child therapist. So I we did a lot of beating pillows with rubber bats
Mm.
because sometimes you just have to have a freaking tantrum. So give yourself permission to have a tantrum. Beat a pillow, scream, yell, cry, set a timer, 5 minutes. This is what you're going to do for 5 minutes, and then breathe through it. So I think those are really ways that you can involve your body in the healing process. And again, just giving yourself permission to feel and permission to not have it all together. And I say 5 minutes because again, we don't want to dwell in the feelings. We don't want this to hijack our life. Right. So after the 5 minutes, do something nice and healing for yourself. Maybe it's a bath, maybe it's ice cream, maybe it's a glass of wine, whatever it is. But then decompress and tell yourself, you know what? I'm okay until the next time.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other things you would like to mention or share?
Are there any other things? I mean, I don't know. I there are always things I want to say. We're I talk a lot. We're talking about mother wounds. We're talking about challenging relationship with mothers. Is there anything else that I want to share about that? I want to say that comparison is the thief of joy. comparison is a thief of joy. So try as much as possible not to compare your situation to the situation of other people that you might encounter. Because again, very cliche, but the grass is not always greener on the other side, right? Sometimes we see these what we believe are beautiful mother-daughter relationships, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't, or maybe they have to go through a lot of growing pains to get to this beautiful relationship, right? Like you don't know what their path was. So don't compare your situation to other people's situation. And again, I believe that everybody's story is necessary for them to be the best version of themselves, the beautiful version of themselves. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to get to the best version of themselves, because you have to do the work, but you are given in this life everything you need in order to get there. So just remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I have one more question.
yeah.
Because we've been talking about mother wounds, and especially between mother daughters. What have you seen with son and mothers? Because that's kind of a big question. Because obviously, my brother's experience and his dynamic with my mom, that's a whole different element compared to the trauma and the quote unquote like FOMO I've experienced with my mom compared to like you said with the comparison and what I see with mothers and their daughters. So I'm just kind of curious to see if you have any insight to share about with sons.
Sons and mothers are super interesting. So I'm trying. I don't want to bash men. I'm trying hard to find my words. Men are not as typically, men are not as insightful as women. So they're
Like not as self-aware.
not as self-aware, exactly. So their typical mommy issues, as we want to call it sometimes, often come out as treating, if they're, straight males, as treating women poorly. Um, or yeah, that's one thing that I'm going to say. So typically it comes out that way, or not being able to have great relationships with women. And again, I'm trying to choose my words very carefully, because I don't want the masses of men to come for me. It's I don't know why it does not outwardly affect men as much, but inwardly, absolutely it does. Funny enough, I don't get a lot of men that come and seek therapy. I think again now there's a more influx of men saying, "Yeah, let me do this work for myself." But men historically have swept these things under the rug until they get into their own family of origin, and then that's when it seems like they kind of mirror the emotional unavailability.
Mm.
If that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I've seen.
Okay.
What I've seen.
Yeah, I was just curious because I was thinking about my brother and like, oh, I know there's men that listen to that don't have their mom or they have a strained relationship to. So I was just kind of curious to see what you had to share on that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I think I'll wrap up the episode now because this episode's been great. It's been very insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this with me and the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. And again, like I absolutely love that you have this podcast. I love the name of your podcast, because relationships are complex like wine. And I and it's amazing, because the younger you are when you start doing the work, the better your trajectory is, right? So I love that you are the voice, or you are a voice for people in your age group. I love that you all are having these conversations, like having extremely important, crucial conversations that years ago people didn't have, and people were just really moving through this life suffering alone. Um, and we're not, it is my true belief that we are not meant to do this life alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're supposed to be communal beings, and things like that kind of get us back to community. So kudos to you. This is beautiful.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot. No, it really does mean a lot. So thank you.
Of course, of course.
Well, guys, I hope you really loved this episode. I did. I definitely got some like therapy out of this session for sure. It was very insightful and definitely left me a lot to reflect on. So, thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.